What would you say is the ratio of training to recovery that you do? I mean, I'm sure that ratio has shifted as you've gotten older, but where would you say it's at kind of today?
I would say that like most of my lifting career, I really paid attention to how I lifted, and it was very like specific. Even though it was like auto regulated, you know, I would just pick stuff when I went to the gym. Everything was by feel. I very rarely followed any sort of programming or even wrote out anything. I just like lifted because I started lifting at 12, and then by the time I was like mid 20s, early 30s is when I started getting my strongest. I was like Mozart, you know, like just shit made sense, you know, just somebody getting on a musical instrument that they're very familiar with. And so when I started to pursue powerlifting and go down the rabbit hole further and further, I didn't really need to think about a lot of particular things that maybe other people need to think about in terms of like warm up, cool down, recovery, because I just knew it was all part of it already. And that's the way I was taught, and that's the way I learned. One of my mentors was Louis Simmons, so one of the best to ever do it. You know, had one of the strongest gyms in the history of the world.
West Side.
West Side Barbell.
Heck yeah.
And yeah, I learned a lot in doing that. And so like, yeah, one day you would go real hard, and the next day would be like you drag the sled. But you could still drag the sled with some good intensity. You can still drag the sled hard. Louis was also a big proponent of you maintaining or holding on to some type of fitness. And so while many of the people at West Side Barbell were big and fat, myself included, because I got up to 330 pounds,
Whoa.
you still need to keep some sort of level of fitness. And so even though the level of fitness is not like Rich Froning, it's not a CrossFitter, it's nothing like that.
Sure.
You're not doing high rocks or anything like that. You're just simply trying to have some sort of baseline that doesn't fall apart, and that will help you recover. And now more recently, since I've been running, I feel like I can recover from just about anything because my baseline fitness is so high. So now if you guys were like, hey, let's go on a hike. I know the hikes out here are pretty, can be pretty treacherous. So maybe that's not the best example, but I would be able to handle some versions of those without it, you know, totally crushing me.
Yeah. Would you say that that baseline of fitness, you mentioned something just a second ago, you said that running creates a baseline of fitness that allows you to recover faster. Can that kind of just continue? Meaning if I run more, I recover faster, and if I run more and more and more, or is there sort of a cap on that kind of activity as well? Where because I know you ran the Boston, I know you ran marathons. Is running marathons, is that a good life choice to just do? Like I know because people do marathons every other month.
My opinion, you know, after doing a marathon, so
Yeah.
you know, people that run often are probably like, he's wrong, but I think marathons are too long.
Yeah.
I just think they're flat out, plain and simple, too far. The amount of the negativity that you get from the cascade of negative hormones that you influence when training for something like that can be tremendous. Now, there are people that are conditioned to do it. There are people that are sort of born to do it. There's people that are lighter weight. There's people that are, you know, weighing 140, 150, 160, and those weights are going to be a lot easier to maneuver through, you know, 26 miles. But I think if people are trying to set some sort of goal to run some sort of distance, I would prefer that people stick with a half marathon. But that's a difficult thing to tell people. You know, that'd be like telling someone like, hey man, instead of having the goal to do 5 plates, just do 3 on the deadlift. And they're like, a lot of people do 3 plates. I want to do 5, you know? And so I understand like why people want to do it. But I think it's a little too far. And then to answer your question about, you know, can you just run farther and farther and farther? You certainly can, because there's people that run, you know, 300 miles and all kinds of really wild things. There's people
James
that,
Perrette.
Yeah,
you had it, James. You
yeah.
had him on twice. That's insane what that guy does.
Yeah, Wild Hunt Conditioning on Instagram.
Yeah.
He's a real beast. So you can build out this engine that is like insurmountable, that can kind of handle anything. But what I've learned over the years is when you really go towards one thing, you tend to lose another. And so like you think of like Marcus Aurelius, you know, everyone always talks about the books he wrote and stuff like that, and that they quote him all the time. But then we also have to remember that he had a son that was like a giant piece of shit. And it's like, why did he have a son that's a giant piece of shit? Maybe he needed to matter to other people too much, and maybe he reached for that and reached for being a leader, but then he wasn't a leader in his own household. So if we look at strength or endurance or getting shredded is great. You know, somebody getting some abs, even just like some visible abs, it's like, amen, brother, like that's awesome. But going much further than that, you're going to miss out on a lot of things. You're probably going to lose some strength. You might really negatively impact your hormones. You probably have messed with that before. I know I've done that with like too much fasting or just getting super lean. Getting super lean for most people, most of the time, is not any healthier. You know, if you think about it from just a logical standpoint, you know, you could probably be 10 to 15% body fat and live your life there and be very comfortable and not have any suppressed hormones or anything.
Where do you stay typically, like right now?
If you try to get to 5%, you know, that's where you can screw yourself up. But you have to do it, you know, if you do things, if you don't put a time domain on stuff, now we're talking about a totally different ball game. So let's say you know, one of you guys bench 275 and you're like, I want to bench 315. I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be so easy, right? But then you're like, I want to bench 275. I want to bench, you know, 315 by Christmas. Well, now I'm like, fuck. you can't. Now we're talking about like an injured shoulder. We're talking about maybe slightly tearing something. You just get in a much more compromised position. So I don't really know what my body fat is right now, but I had it tested like a few years ago, and it was like 10 or 11, and I would imagine that I'm like 7 or 8 nowadays. So I try to stay here, but I also try to just make sure I have enough. Make sure I eat enough calories. Make sure I eat enough fat. I'm a huge proponent in taking the fats and like diving them way down. I call it submarining. Just submarine those fats down super low, but you can't get away with that for very long.
I was going to say there's a time period for that too. You can't just say, all right, I'm going to do this indefinitely. I'm going to push myself into ketosis and just live here. And that's how people get chronic fatigue. People crash. They end up with, you know, a trip to the hospital, like you said, because their hormones are so imbalanced. And it's I'm hearing, you know, balance. I'm hearing moderation. You know, this is the way that people should live. They should strive for moderation to a degree. I get that some of us have to be extreme in certain areas. For me, and getting back to the cardio thing too as well, I, like you, I'm not really attracted to long distance running. I have friends that have asked me to do it, and we're going to do a rim to rim to rim thing as a team eventually. But for me, if I'm training on a program, if I want to look at the entire calendar year and say, all right, how do I want to perform 70% of that? 70% of that time, I know I can do one hike per week. I can go to Camelback, and Camelback is 2.3 miles going to the top. That's not bad, but it's an incline like the Empire, State Building. So it's like in the heat. And so for me, that has been the way that I have learned, okay, I can do something intense at that intensity. That's really the only thing that in a given week is that intense on me. Once, and it's one time a week. I think people have this big misconception. They think guys who are in the industry especially, oh, you must just train at a 10, 7 days a week without fail. And I don't think that's true.
I never take the bait, so if someone comes at me, like if I'm lifting with someone and they're like, really going nuts, like I'll match the intensity. I'll do what they're doing because it's great to like party with each other sort of. However, I won't do the weight they're doing. Somebody slaps on another plate and they're getting all excited. I'm like, I've been doing this forever. Like I know what lane to stay in. I know where I'm at currently. And I'm not going to just hurt myself because you want to squat 4 plates, and where I'm at right now, I'm more comfortable with 3 plates. I'm not going to like just take the bait and do that.
Just do it.
And I also never did that when I was powerlifting. It was really rare. The only exception, sometimes I just didn't want to work out with everybody. I didn't want to work out with a group, so I just like slap hundreds on the bar right away, and that would make everyone go away. Or I'd move, I'd move pretty quickly, into my, through my warm up. I'd put hundreds on the side, and I'd do, a couple reps of like bench or something. Then I'd throw another, another set of hundreds, and now we're already at like 445 pounds. So it's like everyone's like, well, I guess I'm out. It's like, yeah, go to the other fucking bench, get out of here. So I would rarely do stuff like that, but every once in a while for fun, I would do shit like that. But for the most part, most of the time when people saw me squatting years ago, when I squatted over 1,000 pounds, I squatted 1,080 in competition. It was probably more the norm for me to use 4 or 5 plates. So if you think about that and you just do a little bit of math, you're talking about half. 40 to 50%. You're like, well, how does that equal 1,000? It equals 1,000 by, also training maximally, occasionally, but also training optimally, I think is the most important thing. So for me, training explosively was hugely important, but training optimally, having the correct weight on the bar. Louis Simmons said this many times, and I thought it just gave you a good picture. If you had a shot put and you had a baseball and you had a wiffle ball, which thing would you be able to throw the furthest? And it'd be quite obvious the baseball is going to be the one that's thrown the furthest. And so if when we're thinking about optimal weight, the baseball represents the thing that you can throw the furthest. However, there might be a more optimal weight to produce a different amount of force. Like, I don't even really know what the numbers are, but you might be able to put a lot of force or velocity into the shot put. Maybe the shot put's a little too heavy because you can't quite put the torque on it that you need. The same thing, with the baseball. You're going to be able to obviously throw it way faster. Your arm's going to move a lot faster. The wiffle ball is like, you're screwed. You can try to throw that thing as hard as you want. And I probably no one in the history of the world has ever thrown like a 60-mile-an-hour fastball with a wiffle ball, unless you were like put tape over it or something like that, right? And so if we think about weights in a similar way, like what happens when you go to lift, when you go to do a squat, you go to do a bench press, your body's actually very smart. Your body's actually very intelligent. And so your body will actually slow you down. You can only like push so fast against weights that don't really weigh much. But you can find an optimal weight, and maybe you can utilize bands, and maybe you can utilize chains and create an even more optimal thing so there's no deceleration. A lot of deceleration happens when someone goes to throw anything. And that's a lot of times what hurts somebody. When we get older, it's the eccentrics that really mess us up. Someone who's, 50 years old, a lot of people that are 50 can probably, not a lot of people, but a good amount of people that are fit could probably jump up onto this table. When it comes to going down, they're going to look at the ground a couple times. They're going to try to figure out how they're going to get down. And you know this from like hiking. You hike with people that are strong and are in pretty decent shape. They navigate the upward part, right? They navigate the upward part because they're fit and they're strong. And okay, now it's time to go back down the hill. And they might be shaking, trying to figure out how to get down, certain things and jump down certain things. That's going to hurt your knee, hurt your ankle. Going downstairs, everyone knows how going downstairs can be painful, but going up the stairs magically doesn't hurt. You're like, how is that so? And a lot of times it has to just do with those eccentrics. So I learned a lot of great things, again, from Westside Barbell, Louis Simmons, the dynamic effort method, and mixing that with not necessarily training maximal, although the workouts that we did, a lot of them were called max effort days. I always tried to look at that as like just trying to find the optimal load to elicit the response I was looking for. And the response I was looking for was usually, how do I get myself out of a poor position with a heavy weight? Now, when you train in a poor position, you actually don't need that much weight. So you need optimal weight, not maximal weight. So if one of you guys were pitching forward a lot on a squat, you got dumped forward, and I had to kind of pull your chest up a little bit to get you through the squat, I would say, all right, we're going to do a lot of good mornings. And let's say that happened with 500 pounds where you leaned forward on your squat. I would say, let's try 185 pounds, and let's try some good mornings suspended out of the rack on the seatbelt things from Rogue, or on suspended from some chains, and then you would lift in this like bad position. I used to call it lifting like shit, and I did it on purpose. I would lift like shit on purpose because I'm like, my spine is going to like tuck underneath me, and when I go to do my squat and I go to come up out of the bottom, it's going to look like I'm like a dog shitting on the front lawn type thing. Back's going to round a lot. So rather than say, hey, we should never round our back, I actually want to try to train myself through some of those range of motions, but I have to be careful with the weight. So the weight is critical. I mean, in some cases, you hear a lot about like knees over toes and some of the stuff that Ben Patrick does. A great way for people to rehabilitate their knees is to do some full range of motion work. However, I don't really think they need hardly any weight for that, if they need weight at all.
No.
You find a slant board and just squat down and get used to those lower patterns. Those are great. And then I'd also recommend some overload where you are handling some weight, but you're just doing like a quarter squat, maybe quarter or half squat. That's where I think the magic is. And so there's so many different ways
which is
to manipulate your training.
You're talking about both. You're talking about a combination of 90-degree principle, Seidman stuff,
Absolutely.
and Patrick stuff. Just
Yeah.
depending on how heavy you want to go and what it is you're doing, and both have use. Both movements have practical use for your body, for the anatomy. You mentioned running downhill and hiking downhill in particular. I tell people when this subject comes up, it's rare, but I always tell them, no, I hike Camelback Mountain for the way down. I don't hike it for the way. The way up is nice. It's nice. It's heated. If you do it fast enough and a hot enough temperature, you're going to see God. But going down, that's where all the functionality is. It's not just knee over toe, knee over toe, knee over toe the whole way down. It's also your foot placement. I do it in Shama sandals, so I do it basically barefoot. I'm placing my feet and learning to place my feet and learning to trust and rely on myself. Dude, I've slipped and fallen more times than I can even tell you, but I'm not rolling my ankle. I'm not hurt. I'm able to deal with that because I've done that once a week for 6, 7, 8 years. Going downward, even just down the stairs, facing forward as a training modality is a really, really good way to help bulletproof the knees and work through that. Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying, though. Both applications have their place in strength training. Going heavy, maybe doing partials, and then going light body weight, doing full range of motion, ass to grass sissy squats if you can get that far. Man, Ben's kind of the master of that one. Him doing those.
Oh yeah, he does the lunges and stuff like that, right? The ass to grass lunges and things of that nature. I think what we have to keep in mind with training and just lifting in particular, it's all made up. Everything's made up, and so some of the information I might be giving right now might be a little bit newer for some people, but it's also very old. Like, this information has been around for a really long time. There's so many different ways to train because it's made up and because our bodies are all a little bit different. I just think there's really no reason to like hurt yourself or cause any harm based off of what somebody else says and trying to take that as like the gospel. This idea that you have to squat with your heels down is insanity. Like, not everyone can do that really well. And are there coaches that can coach someone to all of a sudden have flexible enough ankles or hips to be able to manage that? Maybe there's some, but maybe there's not even any real reason to explore it. Maybe it just doesn't matter that much. Maybe your anatomy is decent the way it is. Like what's the reason you're trying to do that? Like, are you getting graded? Are you getting paid to squat down with your heels on the ground? Like, for me, my heels come up, but I could still squat down to the ground. I still had a big squat, right? So, and Olympic lifters kind of cover up that whole thing by wearing an Olympic lifting shoe, which has a raised heel, right? And the reason the slant boards are popular is because it allows you to do the Beyonce squat. Beyonce squatting down in her high heels, like on stage and stuff like that. And so you're able to get your hips down much easier. We're always, for some reason, when it comes to training, we have a tendency to like always want to try to make everything harder. And there's a place for that too. I'm saying do both, do every. Use the fat grips, right? Use the fat grips and reduce the amount of weight that you're using. Don't use the fat grips to increase the amount of weight you're using. Some people might say, oh, the leg press is dumb, like, because people can go so heavy on there. That's amazing. If you can go heavy on something and not hurt yourself, that's an incredible attribute to that piece of equipment. For me personally, I love doing belt squats.
Heck yeah.
I'll load the belt squat
Squat
up.
Max MD.
Yeah. And
you showed me that one.
Oh, those are sick, right?
Those are sick, man.
That's such a great piece of equipment. Great way to overload your body.
Yeah.
And we're talking about how do you get the benefit and the reward out of stuff without getting the negative? I'd mentioned earlier, submarining your fats. It's like, well, how long do we do that for? Do we Chris Bumstead that and do that for 6 weeks? No, we don't. There's no reason to do that. We're not stepping on stage. Chris Bumstead is amazing, but he does like 1,250 calories, I think, for 6 or 7 weeks.
Jeez.
But that's a skill set.
Yeah, I'll say.
That's a particular skill set. And then his his protein percentage is probably close to 15%. 50% of his calories are probably coming from protein. So now you're like, well, where's the energy source? Because protein isn't much of an energy source. You got your fats and your carbohydrates. Well, that's the whole point, is there is no energy source. And that's why he's just ripping right through his fats. we got to also keep in mind a lot of these athletes or these people that we look up to, some of the people in the movies, myself included, people use performance enhancing drugs, and so they're in a different category. It doesn't mean that what they're saying is not valuable. It just means like if you're going to try to do that naturally, then you have to dial that back even further. I don't know if people know this, but a competition natural bodybuilder, they exist. A competition natural bodybuilder will take a minimum of 26 to 30-ish weeks to prepare for a show. A IFBB professional bodybuilder that's not drug tested will do like 12 or 16 weeks.
Jeez.
And a lot of times there's a little prep work that goes into that even beforehand. So they're still mapping out, you know, several months to get themselves prepped correctly for the stage. But the natural guy is just going to take way longer. And obviously they're not going to have the muscle mass and so on. But they have to take their time because they can't just dive there. With the guy that's taking stuff, why would he care if his hormones are a little thrown off? He's taking so much testosterone and so much whatever else he can get his hands on that's just irrelevant. They also don't care about the signaling and the messaging that you might get from excessive cardiovascular training. So they might, you know, go on the treadmill at an incline, and they might do that every day, maybe for 30 minutes, and then they'll ramp it up to 60 minutes, and they ramp it up to 90 minutes over time. And that's a tremendous amount of cardio. If we had a natural kid do that who's trying to get like ripped for a bodybuilding show, he's going to step on stage and weigh 155 and look skinny fat.
Yeah.
He's just not going to look great from that approach. And so different people need to use different approaches. We need to kind of just stop always looking at what these people are doing that we hold in high regard and just automatically trying to apply it to ourselves. There's got to be some context to it.
Yeah, especially you mentioned movies and media. I mean, you're right. The naturalistic bodybuilders, they exist. They don't exist in Hollywood. When it comes to every single person we've ever seen get ripped for a movie, every single one of them use performance-enhancing drugs of some kind, even something as simple as TRT. But every single superhero, Rambo, Arnold, anybody who's in a movie, there's no drug test to be in a movie studio. They don't care. In fact, they are literally paying. I mean, actors are being paid a heck of a lot more than any IFBB pro.
Oh yeah.
So you could. I've always found it really interesting when people get sort of ticked or a little irritated when actors are taking performance-enhancing drugs. I'm like, dude, they have more of a right and reason to be doing that than any professional athlete that you know of. The Rock is making more money for that one movie than 9/10 of all NFL athletes will make for their entire season. So do the math. That makes sense to me.
Right.
But I think you're right. People need to be a little bit more realistic about their expectations for themselves, especially if they are not taking performance enhancers. And it is a good segue to a topic I did definitely want to bring up and talk about with you. You know, because today, certainly even in the time since we last did our podcast when I came on Power Project to now, it seems like there's been a real like surgence of especially TRT. You know, people who the clinics are popping up. My brother started a company. I know you're with Merrick. Is that what it is?
Right.
You're with Merrick. It seems like these companies, these clinics, this service as a general, you know, existence has risen. How do you think that? What's your opinion of that? Is this a good thing?
It's so hard for me to sit here and say like steroids aren't the answer because they've done so much for me, you know. You know what I mean? Like my very like existence and my fame sort of relies on it in some degree.
Yeah.
And I think if we're just being blunt and being honest, you know, you could view Arnold Schwarzenegger the same way. And like I say, Joe Rogan's not Joe Rogan without marijuana. Like there's a lot of other performance enhancers that people can take. I remember having a discussion with my son. He's now going to be 21.
Wow.
Coming up pretty soon. But I remember having a conversation with him when he was like 14 or so, and he was, you know, asking some questions. He was curious about some drugs and stuff. And I was just like, hey, you know, a lot of great things have happened on certain types of drugs. The problem is it's like hard to
distinguish and disseminate which ones.
Yeah, it's hard to figure out, and then drugs can be addictive and stuff like that. And so steroids, I think, a really important thing for people to know that if you're going to mess with them and you already like fitness quite a bit, you're probably going to be a lifer. You're probably going to be in on it the whole time. The results are going to feel good. you're going to want to continue to do them. And then nowadays there's so many other things. There's like peptides and SARMs. There's these GLP-1s, which you're seeing like, some of these weight loss drugs, Wegovy, and all these different things. And they're helping with your hunger, which, initially started with diabetics and stuff. But, I just, without going too far off the path, I think it's not great to be hooked to pharmacology ever, is what I would try to say. And so if you can keep your natty card, I would say just do your best to try to keep it for as long as possible. If you're having some symptoms and syndromes and you just don't feel great and you're not sure how to get yourself out of it, I think getting some blood work done and going with one of these TRT clinics could be really helpful. Mm-hmm. But if I could go back and sort of do it all over again and I was to go down that path, I would say, hey, you know what? I would love to try to do this as natural as possible. Because when you're on the natural side, like even for myself, I was never really against steroids, but I was always like, I'm not so sure about these. I always thought that I was going to take them when I got older. But I always thought, like, what do you do after that? Yeah. And so that's something to think about, something to consider. Same thing with your diet, same thing with your strength. You want to deadlift 5 plates, you want to be 5% body fat. You have to ask yourself the question, and then what? So you're going to take one of these drugs that helps you with your hunger. You lose 20 pounds. Cool. All right. Lost the 20 pounds.
Now you got to go off the drug. Yeah. Now what do we do?
Yeah. And do you stay on it forever? Do you have the cash to stay on it forever? What's the harm in staying on it forever? Mm-hmm. The hard thing to kind of communicate to people about performance-enhancing drugs is I think that if you can take them in a reasonable way, I don't think they're dangerous. Mm-hmm. Like, I literally don't think there's much harm that can be done. However,
all of them as a blanket statement?
As a blanket statement.
Can tren be used responsibly?
I think that something like trenbolone is going to be something that somebody's probably going to fall victim to, like wanting to take more of it because of how powerful it is. I mean, like anytime we talk about it, I always talk about like how amazing it is, so it sounds like a sales it sounds like a sales pitch for it.
Well, yeah.
But it will help you get really lean and it will stack muscle on you. I mean, there's obviously negative side effects to everything. Mm-hmm. Messing with your hormones, I think, is something that people really need to be considerate of because of the types of things that it could do. I've been married for 20 plus years, so things are a little bit different when you're a married man. But one thing to consider is that it's harder to be faithful if you're blasting a bunch of steroids. That's something to consider.
Oh, okay.
If you care about your significant other a lot, most people do.
Uh-huh.
You want to be careful on how much shit you're blasting because it will just drive your sex drive through the roof.
Yeah.
Something I learned more recently, which I don't know why I never thought of it before, but everyone sees the world so differently. And when I say sees the world so differently, they literally see the world differently. There's some people that are colorblind. There's some children that have 20/20 vision. There's some older folks that don't have that same vision. So you literally see and perceive the world so differently. Smell, same thing. Older people smell certain things. Younger people smell certain things. We sometimes gain that ability, as you go through certain phases of life and you start to lose some of those capacities. So, and even hearing, there's certain tones, certain frequencies that people can hear, and there's certain frequencies that other people can't hear. So we sit here and we argue and we fight about, like, I can't believe you love country music. What's wrong with you? How come you don't like this other music? Well, he's hearing it differently than me.
Yeah.
Plus, he has different life experiences that led him to some of that. And so I think there's just there's so much to consider when we're thinking about what we're doing with our hormones, because I don't think anyone's ever said this or talked about it before, but steroids are going to impact the way that you view the world 1,000%.
Yeah.
1,000%.
Definitely.
Yep.
If I have more testosterone and I'm more assertive and more aggressive, that changes everything.
And it's going to change the way people view you.
It could be good.
Yeah.
It could be positive.
Mm-hmm.
Aggression doesn't have to be a negative thing at all.
Yeah.
But it could be a huge negative as well.
Yeah, and it also overrides the natural function. I was reading something where it's like after men have children, their hormone levels naturally drop, and that's to keep them in the family, nurturing the kids.
Dad bod.
Yeah, and that's where the dad bod comes from. So I think it too can sometimes override the natural function of our hormones, which is something to take into consideration.
Some people just, right now just think about I know we all have different experiences with our father, but just think about your dad when you were young. You're like, he was kind of a badass, and then now he's probably pretty soft. He probably cries a lot and shit. And you're like, oh my god, this guy's a fucking this guy's a disaster, right? Like,
what happened?
Yeah, he was such a man. Like
he was like scary. Like I remember being like as a little kid, your dad was like this larger than life character, and then you're right, you get older, and that changes.
I remember I had a conversation with my cousin, and I'm like, and they were talking about my uncle, and I was talking about my dad, their uncle, and we were both laughing. I'm like, yeah, they get on the phone together and they start being emotional about like what their kids are doing. Like, what's wrong with these guys? Like back in the day, these were guys that like never changed a diaper, never prepared food, never wouldn't touch the laundry. Those are all women jobs. And like, they were like a man's man, and they and now here they are crying and being weepy over everything.
It is funny to see the natural progression of life. I mean, just look at your parents, man. Look at your grandparents if you're lucky to have them. Where do they end up? How do they become? I mean, that is where we're all going. You mentioned something that's very interesting, and I want to make sure we don't just glance by it. You mentioned the use of testosterone performance enhancers and how that might impact the spouse. You had an episode recently that I was blown away by, because it's very rare that on any subject matter like this, there's something that I just never really thought of. But you had somebody on who was talking about the impact that putting someone on TRT has on their wife. Because sometimes, I mean, a lot of times, if you as a man go on testosterone, your sex drive goes up. That does not mean your wife's sex drive goes up with you. And this was causing, in the episode I listened to, some sort of a disconnect between spouses that were, before he went on TRT, they had a great relationship. Like, yeah, we had sex once a month. It was all good.
Right.
We didn't hit. Now he wants it every day. And I'm not on that same level with him anymore. What do we do? And who was it that was the guest on this?
Dr. Mo Carrot.
Yes.
Yep.
And he said, he goes, well, I mean, there's two ways we can do this. We can regulate your hormones down, or we can consider putting your wife on it as well. And we can do this as a team. Is your wife open to having a conversation about her blood work? But again, just that was a way to view the use of performance enhancers like I'd never thought of before. It never even entered my head that a married man going on TRT, that's going to impact your significant other, maybe in a bad way. I only ever thought of it being a positive.
I've had some guests on my show. One guy, Jake Benson in particular, who talked about, and I'm sure other steroids probably do this as well, but trenbolone in particular has an impact on like your olfactory nerve, which is literally like your sense of smell. And all these things, they have a profound impact on the way that we act. The smells, the stuff that we see, the stuff that we hear, the way we perceive the world is a really, really important thing. And something I've worked on for over a decade is my perception and my interpretation of what's going on around me, and taking that information and trying to be rational and logical about it. But you can just kind of imagine, if we just make you a little bit more irritable, we make you a little bit more aggressive, we feed you raw meat and keep you locked up in a cage type thing, you might not be as like neutral. You might be more reactionary. It might be harder for you to, somebody sends you a bad text and then you, what the F, and you yell at them or fire them or something wild like that. Things like that can happen. For myself, I've been very fortunate to where I have, for the most part, been a very calm and reserved person my whole life. So steroids didn't amplify that side of me. But there's still things that people should understand, that if you're going to take TRT or performance enhancing drugs in any way, that you are probably going to want to use them for a long time. And you could be a lifer, as I said. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that potentially. They're not necessarily healthy. And I think that's important to illustrate.
Interesting.
I think that people are like, well, 50% of people that have heart attacks, they have low testosterone, and 50% have high testosterone, and things like that. But if someone is trying to utilize TRT and they're trying to get a real boost out of it, in my opinion, the dosages that are recommended are too low. They're good enough to take you back to maybe where you were, get you back to some sort of baseline. Testosterone levels, by the way, aren't the end all be all either. They matter probably way differently than what we currently know. We don't know enough about it at the moment. There's your free testosterone, there's your regular testosterone levels, there's your testosterone to your estroidal, and it's like it gets to be very, very complicated. That's another thing about TRT and performance enhancing drugs. The conversation is absolutely ludicrous. It's insane. Go and listen to Vigorous Steve. Listen to Vigorous Steve. Go on his YouTube channel, and you start to listen to some of the information he has on his show, and you're like, these guys are drug addicts. Like full-blown drug addicts, because they're talking about all these different ways they're going to manipulate. And I'm not even necessarily saying that it's bad, but they're addicted to this whole other side of the game that we don't always really think about.
They're manipulating their testosterone levels? Is that what he's doing?
Manipulating everything.
Everything. Okay.
Manipulating. I mean, a lot of the people that use performance enhancing drugs, they're also using things to enhance their like dopamine, things to increase their serotonin. They're starting to pull in drugs from everywhere, because why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
You know, a bodybuilder's like, well, I'm going to manipulate my testosterone, but then they're also like, I'm going to manipulate my insulin. And so they'll shoot insulin, and they'll take, and insulin isn't enough by itself, so then they'll take growth hormone with it. A lot of times growth hormone can have some negative side effects on your insulin resistance. And so they'll take like insulin, growth hormone, you end up with this, I might have said some of that wrong, by the way, because I'm not an expert in some of this stuff, but they start to end up with a cocktail.
Yeah.
And the cocktail's not 1, 2, 3 things. It's like 7, 8, 9, 10, 20 things. There's a lot of different things, and myself included, I still use a lot of these things. I'll use BPC 157, which is the Wolverine.
Yeah.
Wolverine.
TB500 with it too, right?
Yeah.
Those two together.
Yeah, the Wolverine.
Peptides.
Yeah, the Wolverine combination. And you're just like, why not? I already take all these other things, and I could sit here and try to tell you like, oh, I know it's safe. I have no idea how safe it is or isn't.
You take it orally, or you inject it?
Inject it.
Inject it. So then you're getting it from a pharmacology place that had to label it as not safe for human consumption. Because I get the same thing, because the FDA hasn't approved it.
Right.
I think
recently they pulled it, actually. Yeah. So
they
it's supposed to be illegal to prescribe, but I think it's still,
hush hush under the table.
Well, and that's another thing with these TRT clinics is these TRT clinics are a lot of them are just salespeople for steroids. I mean, they're just, because like I know of a handful of them that are actually selling other compounds. That it's like, no, that's not part of the. Yeah, that's not part. I'm like, cool. Yeah, give me your number. That's great. But
that's not part of my lab result.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
a lot of off-label stuff. I guess.
Oh, absolutely. And it's you mentioned the overuse of drugs, even illicit drugs. There seems to be a very large correlation between the two.
I just want to interrupt for a second. I want to say that taking performance-enhancing drugs and taking recreational drugs is about the same thing. You're doing it recreationally, like you don't need to be blasting testosterone, but you're doing it to have more fun. Yeah, you're doing it to have more fun, and again, that can be a positive. For me, somebody wrote on my YouTube one time. They said, "Oh, it's easy for you to do all this like running and all this lifting and stuff. You're on steroids." And at first, I was like, "That guy's being a," and I was like, oh, he's actually like kind of right. Yeah. I'm more motivated because I have more testosterone in my body. Fucking cool. Yeah. So for the person that is having a hard time getting off the couch, this could be revolutionary. This could be a big thing that changed your life. Again, I would just be aware, be aware of your blind spots. You get involved in business, you get involved in a relationship, start thinking, what are my blind spots? What do I not know about this person? What do I not know about this business? What do I not know about performance-enhancing drugs? Where do I need to be on the lookout for? Do I have a history in my family of heart disease? Do we have diabetes? Are there certain drugs and certain combinations of things?
Prostate cancers.
Yeah, there's certain things I should watch out for. And at the moment, there's not a lot of people that know enough to really help you truly navigate that, especially if you want to be performance enhanced and not just on TRT.
So I'm sticking with that. There's a difference then between the two. TRT and performance enhanced, you're making a distinction between the two. What is it?
I would say, TRT, you're more reserved. You're honestly like just kind of putting your hands up and you're letting a TRT clinic monitor your health. You're getting your blood work checked regularly, and with the help of a certified, healthcare provider, doctor-ish type person, they are communicating with you on the amount, the dosage. They are, and you're checking in with them at least every minimum once a year, if not more, if not, twice a year, something like that. And they are communicating to you about your supplements, your sleep, your nutrition. And these are people that are informed. So one of the big advantages, I know I'm going all over the place, but I personally am a person that believes things are negative and positive. Like everything is sort of a double-edged sword. Going to a doctor could be great because you could need surgery and you need someone with precision that knows what the hell they're doing when they open up your body and they have to take something out or whatever the case may be. But a doctor doesn't know anything about nutrition. A doctor a lot of times doesn't know anything about like microplastics. A doctor might not know some of the stuff that you're looking for. But in the case of like TRT, you're hoping that the person is fairly well informed on a lot of these matters, and that you are basically just seeing most of the positive impact of these TRT type drugs like testosterone. So you're just taking 120 milligrams or whatever was prescribed to you, and you used to feel worse and now you feel a little bit better. But it's not like, you're not like, oh my God, I gained 20 pounds of muscle. Yeah. Oh my God, all my lifts are through the fucking roof, man. I'm an animal. That would mean, in my opinion, that would probably put you in the place of like you're starting to take more performance enhancement type of amounts, and that would just be like double. So you'd go from 120 to 150 to like 300, somewhere in that range.
So there's maintenance maybe to get you to an optimal state, but then there's performance enhancement to push you beyond the optimal range, if you will, to get into.
And there's just so much play there. There's so much you can do.
It's gray. It's a gray area.
It's a very gray area, and I guess that's my main point. It's like you're kind of like you're making these little mini fires, and you're hoping that it never turns into like this giant roaring blaze. But
that's a good way of putting it.
It most likely will get out of control. You most likely have to call to the fire department at some point.
It's an interesting concept, though, because if you look at the state of being, quote, natural today in 2024, it's not a bad argument that somebody could make that life today, you mentioned microplastics, our water, our foods, the average...
Our mindset even.
Our screen time, our mindset, our mental health, like you and I were talking about outside. The average, we'll just say the average American male today is not where our fathers were at their age. The state of being natural is the state of being depleted, non-optimal. You are living and existing in a less than optimal place just because of what society has done to you. And that's even if you're a healthy person. Bro, when I went on TRT, I was 25. And when I got tested, my range was somewhere in the 3s. And at that time, I had a backdrop since I was probably around your age, like 13, 14 years old when I started lifting, and I learned a little bit about nutrition, what protein was, what to eat, like, okay, you should probably have a steak, you shouldn't have candy. I'd been living my life and training for at least, call it, like 9 years before I ever touched TRT. And when I got my levels back, because when I went in there, I thought it was a joke. I'm like, come on, there's no way. I mean, I'm a healthy person. I'm fine. But when I got that back, I remember the feeling. I was like, how am I 300? My dad is 500. He's in his 50s. That doesn't make any sense. But that's what's happening. It's happening to a lot of us. So the state of being, natural, not on testosterone, is kind of you're electing for an unhealthy lifestyle. It's not a bad argument.
Well, it's a great argument because 70% of the population is overweight. A lot of people are very sick and they're on medications anyway. So
yes.
You're already tethered to the pharmaceutical companies. Why not get on a little test?
That's a great way of looking at it.
You know what I mean? I mean, it does make some sense. And again, I know I'm for myself and against myself, but this is the way my brain works. I like to try to look at things from many different angles. But part of the reason why I'm saying, like, if you don't really need to utilize it, then maybe you just don't for a while. Like, what's your goals? You want to be able to run a 60-second 400 meter? Like, you can do that naturally. You want to bench press 3 plates? You can do that naturally. Like, there's just a lot you can do naturally, and understand everyone has different genetics, different starting points. Things might be a little tougher for one person versus another. But what you will get on that journey, not that taking your journey naturally is, exponentially so much easier than taking your journey enhanced, but when you work really hard towards something and you work for something day in and day out, it's what makes you into the person that you are later on.
Yes.
So for myself, I worked at this for a very long time. I worked at this for, over a decade, well before I ever really heavily considered using any performance enhancing drugs. I did a 500-pound bench press before I ever took anything. I was a pretty good athlete. Like I did some stuff. I got myself to certain ranges and I did certain things naturally. I could have taken those things further. One of the reasons why I initially got on performance enhancing drugs is because I just wanted to be bigger. And that was sort of the struggle for me, is I would weigh almost what I weigh now when I was natural, and I couldn't quite figure out how to get like bigger and leaner. I could get leaner and I'd be smaller, and I could get bigger but I'd be fatter. And so I'd look at my gut and I'm like, oh man, I'm bigger, but shit, I'm getting soft, And so that balance was really difficult. And that is going to be something that would be harder if you're natural. But I'll just say this too, in terms of like drugs, how many people do we really know that are drug free? They're not blasting caffeine. They're not on some sort of pharmaceutical. They don't have some sort of side habit with THC or kava or kratom or
everything.
I mean, just as huge. And again, I think those things are great. I think alcohol, I think all these things can be an enhancement. They can be an enhancement to our lives. Like, who wants to try to go through life completely sober all the time?
A year is a long time if you're 100% sober.
Right?
It is.
You think about like your deprivation tank, your float tank type thing, right? You go in there and that's to kind of like not do it. Well, I guess a lot of people will take stuff and then go in there, but
I got to comment on that. I got to comment. I mean, I will tell you this, man. There are ways, and this is, going through life sober. It really has to be defined what that could mean for someone, because there are ways to achieve sort of like psychedelic realism, even without the use of drugs, of quote unquote drugs or psychedelics. You can get there through breath work. You can get there through meditation. You can have these profound experiences. I've had some profound experiences in that sensory deprivation chamber where it's very hard to describe the feeling that you get when you're in a state like that, because you're not asleep, you're awake, you're very conscious of the fact that no, I'm not, I know I'm still in this tank, but I'm right there at that dream state. And there is this very interesting space where you're not awake, you're not asleep, you're right on the fringe, and you're conscious of your thoughts. But the minute that alarm goes off and you land back in your body and you're like, whoa, I don't know where I was for the last hour, but I wasn't here. That is crazy. That's when you have an appreciation for the fact that I can achieve a lot of the, some people who just want to get effed up, like, okay, all right, go drink, go have fun, do your thing. But if you're actually kind of searching for something, if you're trying to do mushrooms, or you're trying to learn more about yourself, or learn more about your experience with God or your creator, you can get there without the use of drugs, using something like that. Going to a breathwork class. There is a way to live life not sober, but not doing drugs.
And I think that's what makes a lot of us addicted to fitness, exercise,
Oh, yeah.
And that's what that's where you end up with, back to this conversation about like recovery. You might need a lot of recovery modalities if your workouts always take you a lot. But if your workouts don't take from you, they just add to you, then you won't need as much recovery modalities. You won't have to like really think about all this stuff as much. I know for myself, I've trained many, many times, thousands and thousands of times where I've trained so hard that I can't really sleep, and you're like, man, like you're trying to do these things for health, and you're trying to do these things. You're thinking that it would actually help your sleep because I'm going to be more exhausted. I'm going to be more tired. But sometimes your legs are so sore, or your back is too tight, or you can't get in a comfortable position. Yeah. Maybe I was deadlifting heavy that day or squatting heavy that day, which I don't do a lot of that stuff anymore. But I found at every turn, I've made myself like compromised many, many times over. So I did it with football. I did it with powerlifting. I did it with bodybuilding. Now sometimes I do it with running. So like, with running, I might, go to get up out of my chair, and I still got to like, it takes me a minute to, if I've been sitting down for a little bit, just relaxing, watching TV or whatever, it takes me a few minutes to like be more upright and like, walk across the room normal. I'm like hobbling across the room. Right. And I've had to really think about that a lot. I'm like, why do I keep training myself into this like state? But some of that has to do with how you train and how you perceive your workout to be. So if I perceive the workout to be really hard, I might take Kratom. Well, Kratom's going to override my normal, natural sensory of how I'm supposed to feel when I run. It just sends you off into, blast your brain off into, outer space somewhere.
Does it really? I've never tried it or touched it or anything. Kratom. You use this when you run?
A lot of times, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, and
it helps?
Oh, it's amazing.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's amazing. Yeah, you could be like, oh, I'm going to go on like a 2-mile run, just kind of see how, and the next thing you know, you're running for like 10 miles.
I like it.
Yeah, and you'd
love that because you do a lot of distance stuff.
You're in a great flow state. But Kratom is a double-edged sword. It's another product that you can get addicted to. And there's some people that get addicted to it, more chemically, and there's some people that get addicted to it because they're stacking dopamine habits.
Yeah.
Like sitting down in front of the TV and having like your favorite ice cream.
And
right?
your phone open.
Yeah.
And
and you just stacked everything up. And Andrew Huberman has talked about this before, and I think it's a pretty valid point. Like, be careful with how often you're doing that. But anyway, back to the running is like, even if you take pre-workout to go and work out and lift, and you have music on and you got like aggressive music, you just sent yourself into this like heightened crazy state, right? A lot of the Russian lifters, they were big proponents of like, just lift what you can lift. Don't really sweat it. Like, the workout's going to be hard. The workout's going to be intense. You have a 3x3 today, so 3 sets of 3 reps. Well, the reps dictate the intensity. So when you're at 3 reps, you want all the reps to be difficult, but you want to have no mechanical error. So we go to, in powerlifting or in strength, most people that know what they're talking about, you go until there's like a mechanical error or just get close to that. You're not really going to true failure.
Got it. Yeah.
Failure would mean you just flail around and get the reps whatever way you can. But in this case, you're looking for a deviation in your technique and your form. So you're doing your squats, you're doing your deadlifts, and you start to really round over on rep number 2, and you're supposed to do 3 reps. Well, that's the end of the set. You just do 2 sets, and maybe you either lower the weight for the day by 5-10%, or maybe you're just doing 3 sets of 2 for the day. So you sometimes just kind of audible
listening to your body as
and
you
make
train.
Those changes. But if we had pre-workout beforehand, caffeine, has been studied many, many times to be able to basically help you get more from your body than you otherwise wouldn't be able to if you didn't take it, right? It's going to liberate some fats. I think it can help with explosiveness to some degree. There's people taking, modafinil and other things to like help them like explode into what they're doing in their workouts, also giving them like motivation. Now we got music cranking. And so now you just did something that is very unnatural. So you emptied your tank the way that you should when you train, but you emptied your tank in an unnatural way. And so now later on, when you go to sit down and watch some TV with your wife or whatever, and you go to get back up from the couch or chair or whatever, you're probably going to be pretty screwed up, because now all that stuff's out of your system, right? All that stuff's out of your system, and now you're feeling the effects of the training modality that you did for the day. It's about the inputs that we give ourselves each and every day. And so then what happens when you go to train the next day? Let's say you go to train the next day, you had a full day of work, you just have kind of a normal 9-to-5 job. You're driving home, you're like, oh my God, it's the last thing I want to do is go to the gym. You're like, F it, I'm still going to go. You stop at the convenience store, you get a Bang energy drink, you crank some Metallica or whatever it is. On your way there, you get all fired up, some Thunderstruck from AC/DC, and next thing you know, you're kind of doing the same thing, and you think that it's a good, positive thing, and it could be, but you know, how long are we going to burn the candle from how many different ends for how long? Maybe it would be good to have a rest day. Maybe it'd be good to just say, I'm just going to go in the gym, do a couple sets of deadlifts, do some stiff leg deadlifts, do some bent over rows. I'm going to lower my expectations of what the weights are because I'm pretty wiped out, but I just want to get some good training. I just want to see how my body feels. I'm not going to take any drugs. I'm not going to take any pre-workout. I'm just going to go, I'm not going to blast a bunch of music into my head. I'm just going to go train, going to go lift, going to try to give myself some good inputs. And when you go to lift those weights, if the 275 pounds that you're lifting for that day feels pretty heavy, that's still a heavy input to you, even though maybe you're capable of lifting way more. So it's kind of an auto regulation, and also it really matters how you feel on particular days. The Russians studied this a ton when they were bringing up a lot of their Olympic lifters. The weight that you actually used for the day, it kind of always matters, but it was sort of irrelevant to how the weight felt and how you move the weight. So if you move the weight, like, not if you're dogging it, but if you move the weight like it's a 90% load, then you got similar results to if you lifted a 90% load.
Very interesting. I mean, it's a very nuanced approach to lifting and training. It does go quite contrary to what we see a lot of the bro science, a lot of the even the big name guys, a lot of the dudes who are on social media in the industry are always pushing that, you know, are you going 100% maxed out energy,
going to failure,
pushing to that nth degree. And then there's guys who are claiming, I remember Robert Oberst was on Joe Rogan, and he said he doesn't even think people should be deadlifting like at all. I was in that I don't know that I agreed with that, but the more I sat and thought with, you know, kind of absorbed it, I get where he was going with that. Like, I do. It may not be every single person out there needs to do the exact same lifts. You know, squat, bench, dead may not be for everybody. That may not be the safest way for a person just based on their biomechanics to be lifting. I mean,
I like to think all those things too. But I also have a saying that says, if you don't lift, you don't count.
I like it.
you gotta lift some weights, you know. Just in where we're at in the United States these days, I think it's really important that people do some sort of resistance training of some kind, and maybe it's not necessarily just like going in and deadlifting, you know, X amount of weight. I would agree with what Robert Oberst said. Where I would disagree is, I would say what he was talking about. He actually mentioned more specifically that you're not going into a lot of college, you're not going into a lot of university settings and pro settings and seeing them really give a crap about maxing out on deadlifts. And there's a lot of different reasons for that, the risk to reward and so on. However, you still see people doing some types of deadlift. So if we're going to talk squat and we're going to talk deadlift, well, you're thinking of just squatting with a straight bar on your back, right? And you're thinking of deadlifting with a straight bar. Well, you change everything about a deadlift, and you change. Remember, I was saying about the inputs earlier. You have a way. The risk to reward ratio changes drastically when you start to lift up a trap bar, or if you start to pick up sandbags. Sandbags. People are so out of touch with how you're supposed to lift. Like, people just don't know. They haven't been given the knowledge. But when you go to lift a sandbag or you go to lift a stone, you would watch a professional person lift one of those up, and you'd be like, that's the complete wrong way to lift. Why'd that guy lift that way? That guy totally rounded over his back. Like, what is he doing? He didn't hurt himself. But that's the way you lift those things. One reason is because those things are usually exponentially quite a bit lighter than what you would have on a barbell. Lifting, you know, these sticks with these wheels on them, these barbells with plates on them, isn't the healthiest, best thing for us to do all the time. It's convenient, and it allows us to overload and handle some good weight. When I used to do seminars, I'd go around the country and ask people, you know, anybody here lift 400 pounds, 500 pounds, 600 pounds? Like every time it was, you know, 400 or 500 pounds. It was always, oh yeah, I did do a 400-pound lift, and say, what lift was it? Almost always it was the deadlift. Every once in a while there'd be like, you know, pretty good squatter in there or something like that. But it was usually the deadlift. And so that makes the deadlift an awesome exercise in some ways, because we get to really overload. But when is the overload like a little bit too much? You know, it's like, okay, you can deadlift 400 pounds, but then you can't pick up a 150-pound sandbag. Yeah. I'm kind of confused now, right? Like if you can deadlift 400 pounds, especially for a couple reps or something, you should be able to pick the 150 up, 150-pound sandbag and run across the gym with it, right? Yeah. The sandbag is going to be lifted in a way different fashion. You're going to actually intentionally round your back over. The weight is going to be in between your legs, so you're going to kind of almost like a sumo stance, which everyone considers for deadlifting to be cheating. Then you would actually, if you're lifting a stone, you actually try to crush your own forearms. You wiggle your arms underneath the stone or underneath the sandbag. And then from there, you're actually intentionally rounding your back over to lap it. You're putting it into your lap. And then from there, you're normally placing it up on something, or you might shoulder it. Or in CrossFit, they sometimes will chuck them over their shoulder. Some of those people are extremely strong. I've seen like some of the CrossFit girls do like 200-pound bags, 300-pound. I mean, it's awesome. It's awesome to see. But those are, I hate to say they're like more natural movements, but they're more natural movements.
The sandbag,
because it's like the weights aren't on the ground. You know, like when you go to like do a deadlift, the weights are on the ground, but the barbell isn't on the ground. So that changes the way that you lift it drastically. If the barbell was on the ground, if the barbell was just like an inch or two above our feet, so that we didn't like drop the weight on our toes, that would change the way that would change everything. That would change the way that you would even attempt to pick that up, because now you're going to have to negotiate it a completely different way. And in most cases, not all cases, but in many cases, it's going to start to limit the amount of weight that you could use, because now you have a deeper range of motion. So remember I said earlier, all this stuff is made up. All this stuff is made up. The plates, the 45-pound plates, how big they are. Do you guys have any idea? Have you ever heard? Maybe if you heard it from me, because I've said it once before. But have you ever heard on why they're as tall as they are?
No, actually, I haven't.
So the diameter of a 45-pound plate was made for one reason and one reason only, and has nothing to do with the way you lift it. It just has to do with it crushing your head. So it cannot crush your skull, no matter how big your head is, at the current height that it's at.
Meaning if you were on the ground and you dropped it, the bar would not hit. Well, we know a guy, maybe Bay.
You guys try it out and see if it breaks his nose.
He'll
be like, fuck Mark Bell.
So, I get it. It comes down, it crashes, and for people who need a visualization, the bar doesn't go to where it would hit you. Okay, and that's...
I wish Bay was here for a visualization.
Oh, believe me, he wishes he was here too. You would honestly know this better than anyone, because you've manufactured...
I love people with large heads.
Oh, I know. They got such big ideas.
Yeah.
Speaking of ideas, you've been quite the innovator in the fitness space. Do these innovations come out of necessity, or are you looking for things to improve on, things to change?
Yeah, I mean, we can kind of like, it's a great segue into the Wagon Wheels.
Yeah.
I think that's what you were going to probably
bring up. That's what I was going to bring up, yeah.
So the Wagon Wheels is something that I made with Rogue Fitness, and it's just larger plates, because as I was teaching people how to deadlift, I was kind of astonished at how bad their form was. By the way, let me give some shots to some people. All these people making fun of my running and making fun of my sprinting, and like, you run like you got a stick up your ass. First of all, I know. I'm very stiff and very tight. I have not, done a sprint in a really long time. It's been, it's probably been a decade or two since I've really, taken off in like a decent sprint. And I think even when I was younger, I could move pretty fast, but I was pretty stiff.
Yeah.
But I want to tell people, I've been dealing with you guys sending me shitty squats, shitty benches and shitty deadlifts for decades. And I've been patient, and I have never wrecked you and been like, look, bitch, I can't believe you can only deadlift 405. This is disgusting. It's horrible. Your form sucks. But the second that I go to try something new or something different,
they
then
torch you.
They're out there roasting me. But it's all in good fun, I guess.
The wagon wheel. Look at that. Yeah. I love it, man. I got to get me some of those. You know, I've never used them. I've never used them.
On my YouTube channel, I talked a lot about how that plate came to be. And it's a good story, I think, of entrepreneurship in a way. I'll just give you the shorter version of it because it's kind of long. But the shorter version of it was, you know, I don't make plates. You know, I'm not a welder. I don't know anything about steel. I don't know anything about these plates and how to get, you know, how to do stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, I need to partner up on somebody, you know, with this idea. And I've done some stuff in the past with Rogue Fitness. At the time, I think I already made the monolift attachment, that black and red thing. There's a couple other things that I've made with them. And I've done a bunch of business with them. I'm friends with Bill and Katie Henninger. And I was communicating with somebody on their team. And I was like, I want to make these plates. And these plates are going to be, you know, much bigger than a regular plate in diameter, and they kind of didn't understand what I was talking about. So we went back and forth on the idea, and like, oh, it's a pretty good idea, but I didn't really hear much back. It's a huge company. Rogue Fitness is insanely successful. Yeah. And so they're, you know, this is like a little side gig thing for them, right? And so then I kind of hit them up again and say, hey, you know, it's this plate. It's like bigger, because I keep seeing people, they're in these bad positions when they deadlift. And we can't stop people from like deadlifting heavy. They're just going to always want to deadlift heavy. But if they deadlift heavy and they do it in partial range of motions, it'll be better for them. So ultimately what I ended up doing is, you can see there on the screen, you have a Rogue 45-pound plate, a regular 45-pound plate,
deep dish,
and you have it next to the wagon wheel. And in doing some work with Rogue previously, I knew that they loved making stuff look powerful. They loved having stuff have an edge to it, have like, I've even said in videos where they've asked me to break stuff down for them and give them feedback on a product. I've said, hey, you know, in my opinion, it's overbuilt. And they were like, no, don't like, like, don't say that. Yeah. And I was like, oh, why? And like, we want to make stuff overbuilt.
Oh, there couldn't be a better word for it. Everything they make, it's beefier.
We want to make it. And so I had to get into the psyche of their head a little bit. And so I had my father-in-law, who had a machine shop. I had him make the first wagon wheel. And then I took a picture of the wagon wheel next to a regular 45-pound plate. And I said, this is what I'm talking about. And they went, oh. And then they started making it.
Yeah.
So sometimes as an entrepreneur, you have to really kick that can down the road. And even if it starts getting kicked the other way, you got to find that can and keep kicking it down the road. So
hard to imagine that a guy like you would have to kick the can down the road
always
for anything.
Always. But, I get denied on all kinds of stuff, and I have for many years, you know, approaching companies about collabs and communicating with people about different things. And just even saying, hey, like, I'm an inventor, I have ideas. I think I could help your company with different things. I get shot down all the time. And I think it's important for people to know that and understand that. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's somebody else. They just don't feel like you're a good fit for them, and that doesn't really mean anything. It just means that maybe they don't have the finances, or maybe they just feel like it's not a great link up, and that's for them to decide. I've done that to people too. People have said, "Hey, I got a bunch of ideas for you," and I'm like, "We're good." You know, I don't. And so there's so much that goes into that too, because a lot of times what could happen is, you know, Brandon, you could come to me and say, hey man, I got an amazing idea for the Sling Shot. What I would hate to have happen in that scenario would be, I already had the idea, and then now you're coming, and, you know, and then I actually like make it, but I already had it sort of in the, and that happens a lot. And so then that's where you need contracts, and things just go,
intellectual properties.
Things get weird, you know, things get weird quickly. So I do understand, but anybody out there trying to make anything happen, you're going to have to really, you know, push forward. You're going to have to really push hard on whatever the idea is, whatever the innovation is. So, you know, kind of back to, you know, creating stuff. And I would say, like, with the Sling Shot, you know, there's, I just have to say, like, there's some bit of luck to certain things, and people kind of hate when I say it. Like, come on, bro, don't say that. You're kind of passing it off as this thing, but like, I didn't choose my parents. You know, I didn't choose my grandparents and my brothers, and like, I just grew up with like so much love, and so much that I had the ability to maybe think differently than someone else. Like, somebody else might be thinking like, man, my dad comes home at 5:30 and he kicks my ass. I never had, you know, I had all the hugs and all the love and all the kisses, and even financially we did pretty well. So we had a weight room in our garage and stuff like that. And so I think that's important to point out, just because I think it did allow me to maybe think of things that maybe other people wouldn't think of. But
you weren't in fight or flight mode your whole life.
Exactly.
You were free to be innovative. You had your creativity was nourished. It wasn't muted. Even something like that, with somebody who grows up where there may be an outside of the box personality, and then we stick them in a public school, and now all of a sudden they can't express that, or they can't do that. My parents homeschooled me. And then when I tell people that, it's so funny. When I was younger and I would tell people that, it was this kind of weird reaction where people were like, oh, you're shockingly normal for having gone through something so traumatic as homeschooling. Now today, parents are like, oh, I get it. If I had the time, I would. I hate what my kids are learning in school. If they're learning anything, it's terrible. And it's much more, I think, accepted today. But I think that's a big part of success, is if you are a creator, and if you're somebody who has that spark, being around people that really nourish that, people who embrace that, a team that even as an adult, you get what was that? I don't know, being around having a team around you that really helps, you know, get behind your ideas. Right. And when you say, hey guys, I got this, I think it's an idea, you know, ooh, what is it? Like, you know, it's not like, oh great, here we go again. Like, no, it's important to have that as a child, but it's also really important, I think, to have that as an adult, as a businessman.
I think you know, a lot of the most valuable things I've learned, let's say, it probably came from like two spots. One was my dad, and the other is my brother, because my oldest brother, he was addicted to drugs and alcohol and just like all kinds of different things, and he passed away probably close to 20 years ago. But I saw a way of living your life that like wasn't great, and I was like, I don't want to fall victim to that. So it actually kept me very sober, even though we talked about all the other things that we've talked about. It kept me sober away from some of the drugs that can seemingly drag you down a different path than some of the drugs that I chose. Yeah. But yeah, from my dad, you know, part of knowing who you are is knowing who you're not, is a quote that he would share with me a lot. And I always felt that made things easier. You know, like when I got into powerlifting, and still to this day, I think, you know, one of the greatest powerlifters of all time is Ed Cohn. Ed Cohn squatted 1,000 pounds. He deadlifted 900 pounds, and he benched like 580. And, you know, this is like in the 90s or 80s, you know, early 90s, and he was 220 pounds.
Whoa.
Yeah, so I mean, he was amazing. But when I was getting into powerlifting, I was like, oh, I kind of want to be like that, you know. But that quote helped me a lot, because I was like, no, you're not him. You know, Ed Cohn has a different life. He had a different, he's the GOAT. He's the greatest powerlifter of all time. He also is like 5'6". He's got like perfect dimensions for the whole thing. And his journey is his journey. So for me, it was like, okay, well, not that I can't do that, but it was kind of like, that's probably not my path. My path probably won't be the same as his.
Sure.
And so I should probably think about like, who will I be able to become, you know, in this journey. And from there, it's like easier just to like, all right, well, let me just chase this with everything I have, and then kind of see where it ends up. You know, am I a legend? Am I strong? Am I great? Am I this or that? Just let the numbers determine that, let people determine that. And you don't have to worry about it as much. So there's a lot of things like that I learned from my dad. My dad also had his tax practice in our basement. We grew up in New York, and on the East Coast, you have not just like a garage, but you have like a basement. And a lot of times people turn their basement into like all kinds of different things. Sometimes just storage unit, or, you know, people put a heavy bag down there or something like that. But we had weights on one side and a business on the other. And so business and weights sort of always,
I love that.
the way that you migrated
I love it.
everything into your home like this is amazing. And so I saw that, you know, growing up. But my dad, he just had a way about communicating certain things to me from a young age. I remember sharing with him, I think I was like probably 8 or 9 years old. There used to be this, I don't know why this place was like this, but it looked like a castle. And it had, it was a gym that looked like a castle, and it had like tennis courts, racquetball, it had swimming, it had, you know, weights and stuff. So it was like a club type thing. And we used to drive by it on my way home from school. And I remember telling my dad, I was like, one day I'm going to own a castle. And rather than him being like, well, you can't really own like a castle, you know, he's trying to explain to a little kid, you know, rather than doing any of that, he's like, oh, you're going to have a moat around it?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, what's a moat? You know, and he told me, and he's like, you're going to put alligators in there? I was like, hell yeah, you know, so.
Heck yeah.
That kind of stuff, you know, just gave me the freedom to sort of think the way I think. And, you know, I was very fortunate to be able to come up with something like the Sling Shot.
Can I tell you something as well, man? And this is big, because I look at things from a perception. I've always looked at things a little bit differently, but I look at things in perception of like our relationship and the way that you reached back. And you've taught me a lot. This is what I was telling the team before this started. I said, yeah, man, I've learned a lot from a lot of different people, and Mark in particular from business. And a lot of the stuff you've taught me about business really didn't have anything to do with like exercise. A lot of the stuff you've taught me is the value of reaching back and the value of, you know, bringing somebody up who's coming up behind you, man. And seriously, this is when I first came on Power Project, I think I had maybe like, I don't know, 5,000 followers. I had a few clients, really just nothing. But it was taught to me very early on just by you bringing me on and everything. Our relationship since then, I mean, you calling me when I had Bell's palsy, and anytime I've had questions, you've always been just to the degree, man, where it's changed my life and the trajectory of what, man, it's sincerely what I've been able to do is only really possible through a select group of people, and you're one of them. And being that you were in the industry and so far ahead and already so accomplished that you had the mindset to reach back and help somebody else coming up, that taught me something. That taught me the value of doing that. And that taught me the value of trying to do the same. So thank you, man. That was one thing I wanted to make sure I said here today. This being in here right now is real full circle for me. It's real cool to finally have you here, having gone on yours. And that was sort of the genesis of my journey professionally into the world of training. And here we are now. So yeah, man, thank you. It means a lot. It means the world. It seriously does.
That's incredible to hear. I think a lot of times we think that things are going to like cost us so much, you know, like it cost us too much time, or it's going to cost you. It just doesn't cost you much to like encourage somebody. It doesn't cost a lot to call somebody. Anybody listening to this right now, if you know anybody that's sick, you know anybody, even someone that's like addicted to something, somebody who got hurt, somebody ends up in the hospital, fucking give them a call. Give them a phone call, you know. Sometimes a text is like, you know, the easiest thing to do, and that's nice to at least send something like that. But give people a phone call. Try to give people a visit if you can. If you can visit someone in the hospital, these are things that, you know, I have, you know, very Forrest Gump-like life. You know, I was a professional wrestler for several years, and that was something I learned in wrestling because, you know, wrestling really depended on like what you can do with your body, and once you're hurt or injured, you're out. And so anytime anybody got hurt or injured, it was like at the minimum, you're giving them a phone call. Yeah. It only took a couple of minutes, and people were always like, oh man, thanks, you know, because they broke their leg or whatever it was. But I see people on social media getting hurt or taken out by something. You know, a lot of times some of us like train too hard or something, you end up in the hospital, or people end up with all kinds of different things. I'll see it, and, you know, I think a lot of times people have like a good laugh because it's like, you know, something happened to the person, but it wasn't that serious. Yeah. You know, but I'm like, there's a laugh in there, but there's also a lot of seriousness to it when you're pushed up against a wall like that and your body's compromised. So when you had Bell's palsy, it was interesting because I just was running into a lot of people that knew like unconventional stuff. And that's been happening like over and over and over again. Like where someone's like, oh, I got this autoimmune disease. And I'm like, I just heard someone said that about, someone talked about that on my show. And not all these things are always 100%, not always like a cure. But I do believe that most problems are solvable. Like there's answers out there for the problem. I think sometimes you can sort of look within yourself and you can find out what the issue is. Most of the time for men, it's just like that we're burning the candle at both ends, and we need to fucking just rest and like chill out and eat some food and like just.
And even if you don't have the direct answer, just give an encouragement, man. Especially when you are somebody's mentor, or you're in a position to be people's hero. If you reach back words from you to the person coming up, that's the most important thing they'll hear, especially if they're in a critical state or somewhere where they're hurt. That's the best thing they'll hear all month. Best thing they'll hear all year.
And there's also this concept we talked about with John Wolf, Coach John Wolf, where he's like, be open to receiving it. Be open to receiving thanks or help or anything, because when you're not, you're robbing someone of their ability to give it to you.
Yeah, for me, probably like one of the worst days of my life was like realizing how much impact I had on people. Because I'm like, I can't really mess around as much as, I can't burn people as much as I used to. I used to just like incinerate people, in my gym. I remember one of the guys in the gym, I asked him like to do like a squat demo one time. And, cause like it just takes like a bunch for me to be able to like show a good squat. I need to have like a certain amount of weight on there. I need to be kind of like warmed up. Otherwise it's gonna be like this old man version of a squat. And, this young guy, he was pretty mobile and stuff. So I was like, oh, let's have you demo like a squat. So I was helping somebody else out. And so he just drops down in this beautiful, perfect position. And he gets back up and he walks the weight back in. But this guy was really heavy. He was really fat. We called him Baby Fat. His name was Matt. I call him Baby Fat. And the other guy that was watching, he goes, oh my God. He's like, you're so mobile. And I go, oh yeah, well, it's easy to be mobile when you look like a marshmallow. And then like, I had to kind of like start to realize like, okay, that just bite your tongue, just bite. That was fun. That was good to like get that burn in there, but just bite your tongue. You'd be better off.
And I mean, there's burns among peers that are either professional or business, and then there's the shit talk amongst the guys. Yeah. You say anything you want to me when we lift. I don't even care.
Right.
But it's true. There is a certain amount of had a moment like that. It's sort of similar situation where it's like I'm driving around in that blimp that you saw when you got here at the gas station, and I think I was filling up my gas, and I remember I looked at it, and it was this recent, and I'm sure we've all had this, where you're just watching it go and go and go, and I remember I was just like, son of a bitch, this effing economy. And right when that happened, these two 16-year-olds come right around the corner, and they're like, you're Strict Vision Athletics. I'm like, yeah, shoot. Yeah, no, that's me. Bad moment, guys. What's your name? But it just dawned on me in that moment as I got in my car and as I drove away. I was like, well, I should probably maybe regulate myself a little bit more when I'm in public. I mean, how I act and how I behave, people might see it and they just might know who I am. And now forever, they've got this moment stuck in their head about me.
And we saw him at the gas station. He was all stressed out.
Oh, he was cursing. He was angry. And it's true. There's an inherent responsibility with, it's like Spider-Man, great power comes great responsibility. If you have been given a skill set that you've mastered and now you've taken it into a career and now people revere and they know you for your time in that career, well, guess what? Now your opinion matters. Now what you do and say and how you behave and how you act, a lot of people see that. And that's a beautiful thing, but it is definitely a responsibility.
What's it like having this gym, be part of your house?
Oh, dude, it's a blast. It's I wake up every single day absolutely thrilled. I wake up, happy with what I do. I'm blessed by. It's a blessing from God. It's something that only could have ever been possible through Him. There is no way that I could have seen. It is not even just this being here that makes it so incredible. The team. I mean, us, Bay, who eventually, hopefully, you'll meet, the therapists that work here. Dude, we're like 6 or 7 people now, all working towards this, and that's amazing. And everybody, I was talking about this with Courtney when we were hanging out yesterday. She was saying how incredibly odd it is that everybody from this team is totally different skill set. Everybody has their own thing. Like, we are nothing alike, Courtney and I, and none of us are really that much alike. Everybody is different, but everybody is totally motivated to be into this and loves what they do and has their own, investment of time and their own. And when you can bring all that together, that's where you find that synchronicity. And so, yeah, to me, man, to your question, it's the blessing of a lifetime being able to do this and see it flourish. I'm talking to Mark Bell on my podcast right now. I mean, this is like, we were pitching ourselves earlier. He's like, dude, you've been talking about this for like a decade. This is crazy that this has actually happened. We got this. We got DJ Walton, Rampage Jackson. There's some crazy people that are like doing this with us now, and podcasting. I mean, we got Andrew coming on here in November. He wants to talk about. He wants to do the podcast. Yeah. So he wants to talk about just podcasting and like what it does and what it's for. And you, again, I mean, I'm pitching myself because you are sure Joe Rogan's the Podfather, but like in fitness, I don't know there is a different fitness podcast that did it the way Power Project did and the success you guys have had. Congrats too, by the way, man. I mean, our stuff has grown, but yours has too. I mean, since I went on Power Project, it's quadrupled in the amount of what it's shown. So that's, congrats on that too, man. That's really cool.
It's a lot of consistency, but like you said, having a good team around you is like critical, and for me, with Sling Shot and the different brands, you're gonna go through like a lot of phases and a lot of stages, and at one point we got pretty like fat, we got pretty like thick with how many people we had, and then my wife does a good job. She basically runs the businesses. She does a good job of kind of like seeing stuff before it happens, seeing and so what we did is like over a period of time we brought on more and more people, and when we brought on more and more people, we started to make more and more money. And that went, pretty well for a little bit. And obviously, with more people, like it's not going to be like dollar per dollar all the time. Sometimes you got to wait, right? Sometimes you bring in like a GM or you bring someone in, and it might take, just like in football, they bring in different coaches. It's like, well, you got to give the guy like 3 to 5 years. Yeah. Business wise, if you're a smaller business, you might not have 3 to 5 years. If you wait too long, it could really kind of throw things off. And so we got to a point where we did manage like a lot of employees and stuff. And I just started to think to myself, the best way to manage employees is to not have any.
Yeah.
And we just kind of like peeled things back, and we just realized like we don't really need that many people to do what we're doing. We do need people, and we need great people, but we need like quality people more so than just like a bunch of people. And so it was kind of cool though, because at one time, I think maybe when you visited us, we had a pretty beefed up team, and that was a lot of fun. It was great to go into work every day and to see everybody and say hello, and to be able to provide for people, and to know that you're helping with all the stuff that they're doing. They're having good successful holidays. They're able to buy presents, and like they have a good amount of funds to do a lot of the things that they enjoy and that they love, and that's a great feeling. But it's also like a responsibility, and you have like business wise, it's like you have to make these turns before you're forced to make those turns. And so unfortunately we had to like let a lot of people go, but that has allowed the business to grow even more so, and we were able to sort of like outsource just a couple things. So there's a lot of decisions in business that just suck.
Yeah,
they're not fun. Friendships and stuff, and like all those things, they just tend to like they'll explode. They'll basically explode over business, because it's rare. It's not that it doesn't happen at all, but it's rare to have someone that you're friends with, and then they work for you, and then they'll no longer work for you, and then you're still friends.
Yeah, definitely.
It can happen, and that's great if it does happen. But usually you end up with a case of like the employee feels like they're not getting what they're worth, and the employer is feeling like they're not getting what they need from the employee. And so you end up with a lot of situations like that. So for us, it's been great to be able to shift gears and to just move into like a different way of doing things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I despise the word employee. I've actually never had one. Everything that we do, what's crazy, and also again just such a it's out of the box thinking that usually gets you there in a weird way. Having collaborators, having partners, having it to where each person, you know, when we try something out, a lot of this is just like a crapshoot. Like we come up with an idea, like, hey, what do you think about a fitness app? Like, oh, okay, yeah, well, let's try it. Why not? I'll provide this, you provide that, and then if it makes money, we'll profit share it. We'll split it. But it's also, I think, the mindset of people who are employees. You see this. You see this on them. People who have that mindset, they don't think the same way. And for me, I need innovators to be around me. If I'm going to just hand you the reins on a project and say, yeah, let's come up with an idea. Let's see what you can do.
So many people have a hard time with that.
Oh, yeah.
You know, pushing something like it's like you hired the person and you should be able to just push that thing off onto them and they should be able to deliver on that. You shouldn't have to helicopter them.
Yeah.
Because you're going to make the whole project worse. That was something that I was proud of myself to be able to do often, maybe not all the time, but was to pass something off onto other people and just say to myself, they're probably going to do a better job than you could ever do. So you should just shut up and let them do it.
Yeah. If you're lucky and you're smart, that's the type of person you'll have in a position like that, where you can honestly say, all right, if the two of us are in a room and we're going to talk about that subject, he's definitely going to know a lot more. She is definitely better at this type of a thing. I'm going to let her do that. I'm going to let him take over that. I'm not going to be a part of it. I'll just be here when our paths are ready to align. When they come back and say, all right, so I made it. Here it is. What do you think about it? That's it. And that's, again, there's a lot to, I used to hear people who were like, you know, not really aligned with the entrepreneur mindset and just be like, oh, what is wrong with them? Why can't they? But honestly, the more time goes by and the more that you do that, I do get where people fall into. This is not an attack on the employee. I get why people like jobs. I get why people want to take even a very high-end paid employee. That's nice because you do have the assurance of the check. You do have the assurance of your job, and you've got X, Y, and Z that has to be done by this day, and that's it. You get a paycheck. Boom. It's just so much more complicated if you are the inventor, if you are the creator, if you are going to be a entrepreneur. It is going to come with a lot of unforeseen problems and responsibilities that a lot of times I think when you're starting, you don't recognize that they're going to be there.
A lot of delayed gratification.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. That's two words right there. Maybe the hardest life lesson for me since I was born is delayed gratification. I hate delayed gratification. I told you that pool that we've been working on has been at least a 3-year project. Literally today, Chris picked it up from the fabricator and got that thing put on there. I'm like, oh, it's done within minutes of you showing up here.
That's great.
But delayed gratification is something that I also think it's just missing so oftentimes from a lot of men and women today in business. And that's probably the number one thing that it takes to be an entrepreneur is a mastery.
It's the game, you know, it's the whole thing is taking your time, you know, and I think for myself, you said like be late today. And I told my wife and she was laughing. She's like, does he know that like you could be like an hour or two late to just about anything? I have kind of a personality that's like that. Like, I always think that things are going to sort of like work out. And it drives people nuts that are around me because then they do, and they're like, that doesn't make any sense. You know, like I've been in my hot tub before, and we live like a half an hour from the airport, and it's like 40 minutes until I got to be there, and my wife's like, "What are you doing?" Like, it's gonna be fine. And then I'm on my way there. I'm like stuck in traffic or something. I'll get a text from my wife. She's like, "Your flight was delayed by an hour." I'm like, "Yeah, I know. It's gonna be fine. I'm gonna have plenty of time not only to get on the flight but to grab something to eat before I even get on the plane." And I think sometimes just having that mindset like that, I think you sort of like put that energy out there into the world, and then you get that back.
Oh yeah, and it's magnetic. People see it on you. I mean, there's a reason why people want to work with you. People want to be around you. People want to just have conversations with you. People who think in different ways are attractive to people who don't. Right. So, and that's just, again, back to the responsibility thing. I mean, if your personality is magnetic and people are wanting to be around you and they're wanting to listen to you, take that seriously, because that's a gift. That's a gift from God. Brother, thank you so much, seriously, for everything, for coming on. This was one of the craziest, most rewarding experiences of my professional life, I think. I think that's a comfortable thing to say.
Do you think you're going to end up sleeping on the floor like in a teepee anytime soon?
Because of the hair. Is that because of the hair? Significantly. You want to know what? I actually grew it out from the day that I went on. So you were asking how long ago it was?
Yeah,
it was at least 4 years. It was at least 4
No, I
years
just think
ago.
like I think that's like where you and I might be heading anyway, just because like just we get weirder and weirder, you know. We get into the cold plunge, you get into the red light therapy, and then you learn all this stuff that helped you, you know, get through your Bell's palsy. You learn about like methylene blue and these different supplements and peptides, and you know, it's like, oh, I might as well try that out. Oh, I might as well try that out. It's like sleeping on the floor.
Oh, it's
sleeping on the ground.
Sleeping on the ground. I haven't quite gotten to sleep on the ground yet, but I do have those grounding bed sheets. You seen those things?
Yep.
I'm sure you've got them. I don't.
It's the next move. You're gonna be out. You're gonna be sleeping outside.
Oh, sleeping on the ground.
I have a friend of mine's dad who, you know, got all into like eating meat and, you know, all these different things over the years, and he just got like a little weirder and weirder and weirder. And I told my son, I was like, this guy's dad, he sleeps outside on the ground. He's like, you're there. He's like, you might as well just start doing that.
That's outstanding. Well, again, thank you so much, bro. Thank you for coming on. That was so much fun.
Thank you, guys.
Such
Appreciate
a great
it.
episode. Yep. What's up, guys? I hope you liked that episode of Becoming the 1% Podcast. Mark Bell. Man, that was a lot of fun. If you guys want to see other episodes that are along the same lines, click right here.